Hello, my name is Stephen Labiak, and welcome to my Week 4 podcast about bankruptcy law. Today we're going to talk about the different types of bankruptcies. Yes, I know, there are a million places you can go to get somebody else's opinion on the different types of bankruptcies. You know, we're going to talk about the standard Chapter 7, which everybody loves to talk about. But to be honest, we're going to go a little more detailed about the other types of bankruptcies that are out there. So, let's start off with Chapter 7. Liquidation, I'm going to be brief. Basically what it means, you put all your assets in one pile, put all your debts in another. You sell your assets to cover your debts. Before you sell your assets, you get a bunch of exemptions. Most people, they exempt all their assets. No asset case, start to finish, you're done, 90 to 120 days tops. So, other types of bankruptcies that are out there. The one you're going to be hearing a lot more about in the near future is called a Chapter 9. That refers to a government bankruptcy. Can all governments use this? Who knows? It is relatively untested in the courts. You're probably going to see the city of Stockton, California go through this very shortly. You may have heard of the city of Vallejo. You may have heard about a sewer treatment plant somewhere. I think it's in Philadelphia or Arkansas or someplace like that, back east, going through this. But you're going to be hearing a lot more about Chapter 9 bankruptcies in the near future. Basically, it's a bankruptcy for government, allows them to reorganize their debts. Speaking of reorganization, we have Chapter 13. Chapter 13 is a debt repayment plan. I always tell people there are a lot of different flavors of Chapter 13. Easiest, and the one you probably don't want to do, is what's called the 100% plan. This means you're going to pay off your 100% of your debts through a Chapter 13 bankruptcy over a 3 to 5 year period. What this does is basically gives you breathing room. It allows you to get organized. It may cut your interest rates. It's going to get basically everybody off your back. You're going to get a set payment, typically one number, over 3 to 5 years. You pay, and that you will know that once you hit that time period, let's say 5 years, you're done. All your debts are paid off. You owe only your secured debts that weren't going to be paid off through the 13. Typically your house, you'll have a balance left in your mortgage, of course. But what it can do is it gives people organization. It gives people a goal line, if you will, that says, you know what, at the end of this time, I'm done with this. Reasons people would use a 100% plan is, let's say they had already filed a Chapter 7 within the last 8 years and they're not eligible to use it anymore. Their debts are starting to pile up. They have a good income, but you know what? It's just becoming overwhelming. They're getting sued left and right, and everybody's asking for too much money too fast. So you know what? You file a Chapter 13 100% plan, get everything organized, get it paid off. Another flavor, as I like to call it, of Chapter 13 is basically you're buying your assets back. This means, you know what, maybe you could have filed a Chapter 7, but you had too many assets. You had, let's say you had a nice couple classic cars worth a total of $50,000, and you didn't want to let those cars go. You could exempt maybe $26,000 of them total in Chapter 7, leaving you a balance of $24,000, and you don't have $24,000 cash to buy the cars. Now, if you had the $24,000 cash, you probably wouldn't be talking bankruptcy. So, you qualified for 7, but you opted to file a 13 to protect your assets. So what this means basically is you're going to buy that $24,000 or $25,000 worth of cars over the next 3 to 5 years. Payments are going to be smaller. You're not going to pay off 100% of your debts, but you're just going to pay off enough to buy your assets back. It can be a little bit of an expensive way of doing this, but if your assets are what's important to you, this is an option available through Chapter 13. Other types of Chapter 13s, basically paying back less than 100%. This can be, I've done as small as, I've done tenths of a percent all the way up to 99%. Similar to 100% plan in that you work out a payment plan over 3 to 5 years. Some differences though. If you qualified for 7 and you opted to file a 13, maybe to strip off a second mortgage, maybe to pay less back on a car, you can make these payments as small as possible. I've done as low as $100. Typically, it's less than $200 if you qualify for 7. You want to make that payment as small as possible. That way, your unsecured creditors get as little money as possible. So you're asking, why would anybody opt to do this? Well, I mentioned earlier, you may do it to strip off a second mortgage. This means you take the second mortgage, it moves from the secured pile, because it's on your house, to the unsecured pile. Then it gets treated like a credit card. The only way to do that, though, is at a Chapter 13. So you have to be paying back something. So you just set it up so you pay us back as little as possible. I've mentioned pay it back. So how much do you have to pay back? Well, there are a couple things that determine this. First, there are government formulas, government forms you have to fill out that says this is how much you can afford to pay back. Now, you may agree, you may disagree with that as whether you can afford to pay this back. And there's some arguments to be made about whether certain types of incomes, the most common one I asked, can I put dog food? Well, the answer is usually no. There are an exception to this. That's where you got to talk to a bankruptcy professional to find out what it is. As to what you have to pay back and what you can take as a deduction and what is not. The second determines what this payment is the type of debt. For example, in a bankruptcy, certain types of debt have to be paid in full before you can exit bankruptcy. These types of debt are fairly high levels of debt, such as tax debt, child support payment, and spousal support payments. Those are the three types that have to be paid in full before you can exit a bankruptcy. So let's say you qualify for Chapter 7, you opt to file a 13, you owe $20,000 in back taxes. Your payments have to be large enough that over the term of your bankruptcy, you have paid off your tax debt. So those are different types of payment plan arrangements you can have with a Chapter 13. You want to know more about it? I would highly advise you to contact a bankruptcy professional on Chapter 13. Other types of bankruptcy. There's Chapter 12. Chapter 12 is basically a special classification of Chapter 13 for family fisherman or farmer. Why do they get their own special classification? Well, first off, probably have very good lobbies. Second, those type of industries have highly variable income. You're a farmer, running joke is you get paid once, maybe twice a year when you harvest your crop. I know a little bit about this. I live in farm country. You hear that all the time. I'm not so much of a fisherman, but I hear of fishing season. I imagine it's quite typical to be like a farmer. So they have their own special classification. Basically means you have a variable payment. You may be making large payments a couple months. You may be paying nothing other couple months. So Chapter 12 is just a different variation on a Chapter 13. Now we have Chapter 11. You hear about Chapter 11s in the news. Blockbuster recently went through it. You're about to hear about Light Squared. They've just entered a Chapter 11 bankruptcy. What that is a way for a business to reorganize their affairs. So this means they get out of certain lease obligations. They basically decide, as to keep this an ongoing business, do they either reorganize or do they liquidate? So with the Chapter 11 is a little bit different. There is no trustee. You are your own trustee, basically. And you have to propose a plan to your creditors that they get to vote on. If they vote to approve the plan, then your reorganization will happen. You may shed some obligations, you may keep others, you may end up being a lot smaller company, or they may vote to liquidate, which means you basically enter a Chapter 7. Even though you're a large business and you wanted to file an 11, and maybe you were making too much money to qualify for a 7 originally, but you end up being liquidated anyway. This is kind of what happened to Borders Books. They were trying to reorganize under a Chapter 11, but it ended up the creditors would rather liquidate. Chapter 11 can be used for an individual. It's not very common, but the one time you will typically see it is where you have higher housing values that have suffered a loss. I can kind of tell this from personal experience. This happens in the Bay Area, San Francisco, San Jose area, where, you know, in California, they always say if you don't like the real estate values, well, wait a couple months, they'll change. Well, in the last couple years, they've actually gone down kind of significantly, haven't come back up. There are limits in Chapter 13 of how much debt you can file bankruptcy on. Currently, for unsecured debt, that's about $360,000. Secured debt's a bit over $1 million. So if you had a house that you bought maybe for $1 million, is now only worth $500,000, you have a $500,000 unsecured debt now. So that would make you too large to file a Chapter 13, so you would be forced into a Chapter 11. Same rules apply. You create a debt repayment plan in the Chapter 11. You propose it to your creditors. If they approve, you pay them back, maybe only pennies on the dollar. If they don't approve, you can be forced to liquidate. That means they will sell your assets, just like in a Chapter 7. You still get to protect some of them, but they will liquidate you nonetheless. The good news on liquidation, though, once they liquidate, you're done. That's it. No payment plan, no more money owed. It is over. So that's my different take on the different types of bankruptcies. If you have any questions about this or anything else related to bankruptcy, give me a call at 559-274-2868. I'll be more than happy to talk to you about it. Thank you.